We are going to kickstart the day with a very interesting speaker and a very interesting presentation. I'm really happy to have Ben, the CEO of Coworkintel. He will tell you what Coworkintel is exactly, presenting an extensive survey they've been running for the last 3 months globally across the coworking industry to understand the real impact of COVID-19. Ben, are you here? We are going to make our way in Madrid.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, hi, Ben. Nice t-shirt. I see we are all very corporate here.
Yeah.
Nice to have you here. I'm going to hand the floor over to you. And when you're done with your presentation, we'll take some questions from the audience. All right?
Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you very much. So I'm going to present the result of a fairly extensive survey indeed, where we had over 300 answers. We've been partnering with a number of associations and companies, including some that are sponsors of this hackathon. So let's start. For those who don't know us, we are a premium data company specifically focused on co-working spaces. If you are a co-working space, we can help you make informed decisions. This is the two founders, and I would like to thank our partners at this stage, Pauline, of course, and Coworkers, who made this incredible hackathon, the first truly global conference and hackathon, and our other partners. So first of all,
Ben, just sorry to interrupt you. You forgot to share your screen, so people cannot see the slides.
Sorry.
No worries. It's the joy of live videos.
Of the live, yeah. Can you see now? So I'm assuming you can see it. I can't hear you, Pauline, but I think it should be working now. So this is a sort of presentation of Coworkintel. We are a data company working specifically with co-working spaces. And I'm going to start by giving the bottom line of the results of this survey. Essentially, we've asked respondents a number of questions, including the impact on occupancy, the impact on the number of employees, and their sort of outlook for what's going to come next. And what appeared is that essentially, if you look at the impact over the entire industry, so if you look at the sort of average impact, in particular in terms of number of employees, you can see that the industry has fared relatively well. So it took a hit, but not a huge hit. But it's important to realize that this sort of average effect, this sort of industry effect, is actually hiding real tragedy for a very bad impact for sort of small but significant proportion of the industry, around 10 to 20%. So in terms of employee, for example, even if the average employee drop is around 16%, which is moderate, there's a sort of 10% of the industry who has sort of lost all employees. So this is important to realize that there's been an average effect which sort of hides some really dramatic event for some of the spaces. So we're going to go into the details of the different questions. Just giving a few highlights. Overall, the impact on occupancy has been minus 60%, so significant, but not 100%. Still 40% occupancy on average across our spaces, across the 300 respondents. I'll tell you in a second who they were, where they came from. The employee impact has been more moderate, as I said. On average, we're going to see that for some it's been terrible, and we had some other question on the type of contract that we'll go into. Another highlight before I go into the details. The respondent expect on average a recovery in 6 months, so not immediately, and that would be January 2021. Now, who answered the survey? So here I want to thank again our amazing partners because we've been able to reach far and many countries. So we had 300 results coming from 48 countries, so a large number of countries. And the top countries / regions were France, Spain, the US, the UK, Germany, and Latam, that we will treat as one region. Now a bit more, and this is quite important to understand the results that are going to come next. The people who answered this survey were relatively young spaces. So as you can see here, most of them were open in 2018, and with an average year of 2.5. So young spaces. This is important to realize. Now about the type of contract, essentially we had, just as in the industry in general, a majority of lease, 70%, but 20% owner operator, which is interesting, and a small share of sort of other type of contracts, such as service agreement, profit sharing agreement, and similar. Now let's drill into the actual results. So we asked respondents what were their occupancy before the lockdown, during the lockdown, and expected in 6 months in January 2021. We can see we're gonna look at this result from different angles. Here we sort of take a high level. We see that European spaces were sort of slightly lower occupancy before the lockdown than the US, Latam, and other regions. But we see that the drop in occupancy can be seen across the board, and that respondents expect occupancy to be back to the pre-crisis level by January 2021. So this is a common theme across regions. Now let's zoom in Europe. There we've seen a large, very significant drop in occupancy, in particular in the UK. Interestingly, Germany has been less impacted in terms of occupancy. It may be related to the fact that Germany had a less strict lockdown than other countries, and for example, Spain, where I am right now, has had a very strict measures. Now looking at employment, we can see that the employee count in France has held fairly well, so it's close to no change really. And in Spain and UK, it's been around -10%. We see surprisingly that Germany has had like a consequent drop in employment, and I think here it's important to qualify the results, because I think that the question that we asked, which were what has been the impact on employment, it's possible that the German respondents interpreted this question in terms of hours worked rather than in terms of employees. So what the way we can, I think, interpret the results for Germany is that the employee count hasn't changed significantly, but the number of hours worked has basically been dropped, divided by 2. So employees have been kept, but working on a half-time basis. Now, this is one of the most interesting results that came out of the study. There's a number of things going on here. I'll break them down in sort of simple points. Here we're looking at occupancy and the impact on occupancy of the crisis by year of opening. So we're looking at these bars are spaces which opened in 2010, and those are spaces that opened very recently, 2020. Here, there's the first very interesting fact that you can see that to reach a level of occupancy that is often assumed to correspond to break-even, so around 80%, you can see that it takes around 4 to 5 years to get there. And it's interesting because it sort of increases linearly over time. So it's almost like there's a ramp-up time, maybe the time to sort of fine-tune the business model, create the brand, create loyalty from customers. So this is quite an interesting sort of insight on the business models of co-working spaces in general, or pre-crisis. And we can essentially, the other thing we can see here is that even though sort of all the spaces were fuller before the crisis, they've also been hit harder, and so the sort of the post-lockdown occupancy of older and new spaces is not significantly different, except for the extremely young spaces who were open just in 2020. Now we look at the impact on occupancy from another angle, or according to another characteristics, which is the space size. So we look at the impact on occupancy by space size. And here, another interesting insight that comes out of it is that larger spaces seem to have had a higher retention rate, and this is potentially due to the fact that larger space have sometimes larger corporates as members, as opposed to sort of freelancers or very, very small startups, and those companies were perhaps able to sort of fare better during the crisis. Now, I won't spend too much time on this slide, but we looked at the impact on occupancy by type of lease, in particular to see if owner-operator or lease operators sort of fared differently. And the answer is no. The impact has been very similar for lease and owner-operator. So here, this is sort of the message I explained earlier about the difference between the average and the extreme. What happens in statistics, we call it the tail, so the sort of the extreme event. And the picture is going to be sort of more vivid for the employee count, but here we can still see that if you look at the sort of the left part of this chart, you can see that there's sort of 10%. There's a sort of equal distribution of respondent by impact of occupancy, and we know that the average is sort of close to -60%. But then when you look at the right bar, which is essentially losing every member, you can see that it's actually a quarter of the respondents. So, even though the average has been, around 60%, is a significant number for whom it's been this crisis has been a real tragedy. Now we asked respondents whether they renegotiated their lease during the crisis. So of course this applies only to the 70% who are on the lease, and we see that it's actually fairly split. So it's about 50-50 people who renegotiated the lease. We then looked at this question by country, and we can see that a few sort of outliers. So the UK has had a sort of low share compared to the other. But the other are all like at 50 or above, and in LATAM it's interesting to see that all the spaces have renegotiated the lease. Now, this is one of the most important slides, I think, of this pack, and this is sort of going into the distribution of the impact on employment. So if you remember earlier, we said that the impact on employment was around -16%. Now, if you look at who had an impact of 0%, -10%, etc., up to 100%, you can see that 61% had actually no change in employment. But then again, at the sort of tail of this distribution, so for sort of the extreme event of losing all employees, there is actually a very significant proportion of the respondents, so 10%. So this is important to bear in mind when looking at the average. We can see, however, that spaces in Europe, Asia, and LATAM expect to hire after the lockdown. Here, we looked at the impact on employees on employment by sort of size and whether this was related with lease renegotiation. We can see that the sort of the spaces, the relatively small spaces, have actually sort of fared a bit better than the others, and we can see, which is sort of logical, that the reduction in employment has often been sort of related or concurrent with renegotiating the lease. Now we're going to look at the sort of more subjective side of what's happening and what has happened. So we asked operators a number of questions on whether they felt some support during the crisis. So we asked them, for example, if their government has been supportive, We asked them if the landlord has been supportive, and then we asked 2 other questions about the sort of outlook. And here, the sort of main insight that goes out of this is that operators have felt that landlords were more supportive than governments. So if you look at the first bar, only a third of the respondents think or felt that the government has been supportive, but it's over half of the sample for the landlords. Now, in terms of outlook, we asked our respondents whether this was a temporary setback and whether the industry will grow after this. We can see that here it's sort of close to 50-50. So some, sort of fair share of optimism, but also, concern. And we also asked them whether their operations would be very different after the crisis. And here we have the vast majority saying that yes. And of course, this is related to implementing sort of health and safety measures. A little bit more on the expected recovery. So we asked respondents when they would think the recovery would happen. And we have a majority at around 6 months, as we mentioned earlier. Now on supply, we asked them whether they thought spaces would be sort of reshuffling towards more hot desks or more private offices. And essentially respondents on average expect sort of less or fewer hot desks and more private offices. This is also perhaps related to sort of health and safety measures. Now, just a couple more insights on sort of the outlook. So we found that younger spaces, on average, were sort of more optimistic on the time to recovery. However, we found that older spaces and small spaces as well were sort of more positive about the future of the industry in general. And this is it. You can ask questions in the YouTube comments. I suppose I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Ben, for the presentation. I'm virtually clapping as there is no big crowd around us.
Thank you.
Let me see if we can maybe give like 1 minute for people in case they have any questions. But maybe you can talk to us now about what's next with this survey. Like, what do you intend to do with the results and with the outcome?
Yeah, so we partnered with a number of associations and companies for the survey. So we're going to sort of distribute the results to our partners. We're going to sort of look a little bit more into some part of the analysis and sort of fine-tune the results. So the slide that I was showing you in prime exclusivity are the first sort of public appearance of those results. We're gonna fine-tune them and sort of finalize the presentation, and then we'll sort of distribute that to the public, to our partners, and to newspapers and other sort of specialist channels.
I see someone just published a question. So Josh, hello from Mumbai. What was the average seating density of the spaces and the correlation to the impact in revenue / employee retention?
This is really interesting. This is really interesting. This is something we should look into. Actually, we didn't calculate the average seating density, but we can definitely look into this for the final results. And we have the data needed to calculate that. The correlation to the impacts in revenue employee retention. So I suppose the question is the correlation between seating density and retention. Extremely interesting question as well. We have not calculated that statistics, but we can definitely look into it.
Cool. Another question, most co-working spaces start out of passion. How important is for them to start understanding numbers to create the best experience for their customers? Yeah,
that's true. I think sometimes it's possible to think about sort of tenant experience and data as two different things, but I think they are very related. During the hackathon, we might see sort of some project looking into this aspect of things, essentially how you can use data to make the experience better.
And you talked a lot about the survey during the talk, but can you also maybe touch base a little bit more on like what you guys are up to with Coworkintel? What kind of company it is, and what kind of product or service you are developing? Are you already available? Like all these kind of things.
Yeah, so we started recently. We are a data co-op. So our ambition is to be in the middle of the industry and to enable operators to share data together and to make informed decisions. So we sort of go and see operators. It's very similar to a company called STR for hotels, for those who are familiar with that. And essentially, yeah, we go and see operators. We look at their data, their sort of operational data, and then we anonymize it. We aggregate it, and we give them indices that they can use to make decisions about their space, to have better streamlined discussions with brokers or landlords and other things.
Oh, cool. Thank you. The spaces you mentioned that have lost most or all of their members, have they been more smaller or bigger spaces?
The space you mentioned that have lost most or all the members, have they been smaller or bigger space? Well, I think, let me have a look at, I think we can answer this by looking at one of the slides. Let me just have a quick look. Yeah, it's it's neither of this option. It's actually, so the hang on, let me so the smaller spaces have actually fared a little bit fared better. So smaller, we've sort of considered that it's less than 500 square meters, by the way, and then they have fared better than the rest. The space between 500 and 4,000 are where we see the largest drop in employees. I think it's still important though to remember that the sample of the 300 answers were represented smaller and younger spaces. So I wouldn't draw too many inferences from this. But at a high level, the smaller spaces have fared better.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. If people are tuning in just now, or if I can ask you, like, out of like everything you presented, what do you think people should take away with data? So, like, in terms of like, now you presented the data, what should be the main key takeaways of all of this when it comes to the impact of COVID on the coworking industry?
So I think that there's one key thing, which is what I described in the slide called the bottom line, which is a sort of difference between the average and the extreme. Essentially, if you look at the number of employees, on average, industry has fared okay. I think this is partly related to all the measures that were put in place, to the renegotiation of lease that happened with the landlords. So the industry has sort of managed to sort of maintain itself through the crisis. But for small, for around 10 to 20% of the respondents, it's been a real tragedy. And I think it's just important to recognize that. And on a more sort of market perspective, this is a situation when you have some spaces that are doing okay and some spaces that are doing really terribly badly. A situation where you can see some consolidation happening. So anecdotally we've started to see this in New York, and it's possible that essentially the large spaces, with large corporate tenants, sort of find opportunities, for expansion in this period.
And so now with this, so you mentioned that you will publish part of the survey in the media and really like push out the outcome. But would you guys do a follow-up in a few months down the road to see if the predictions that that spaces are expecting, which is like everything is going to restart in January 2021, would you do a follow-up to see if it's actually the case, or like what do you plan with this now?
Yeah, that could be interesting. There's a number of things. So yeah, when people make prediction or outlook, it's interesting because it's very rare to see people actually going back at the time of the event and sort of checking if the prediction was correct. But I think there the prediction was less in the sense of actually predicting what's going to happen. It was more a way of getting an impression of the subjective aspect and how people feel right now. In terms of follow-up, so at Coworkintel as a business has a sort of very specific aim and focus. We collect private data, and we anonymize this data. It's already a lot of work. I don't know if we're going to do a follow-up. The idea of the survey, the sort of context or background of the survey, that we felt that during the crisis, spaces had sort of pressing issues, in terms of funding and survival, and so we wanted to sort of offer free resources rather than sell our services to them. So that was kind of the idea, and hopefully, if it's in 6 months, things are reopened, we'll focus 120% on the core product.
Great. I don't know if there are more questions published on the. Let me just check quickly the Slack. Are you going to stick around, Ben? I think you are on the Slack also. Like, what's your handle on Slack if people want to connect with you?
So I'm Ben Tannenbaum.
Okay.
And there's a Coworkintel channel as well.
Okay, cool. So people can connect with you there as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Someone just said, thank you for the presentation. Would be nice to connect and analyze data for Southeast Asia if possible. So I think you'll have some interesting conversations very soon happening on the Slack. Before I let you go, because at Coworkies we have this little ritual of making selfies with everybody we normally physically meet. Yeah. But now, because of social distancing, I would actually love to make a selfie of the two of us, so we can click, because it's also a live, it's an online conference, so I cannot make a proper picture like if we were next to each other. So can you just...
you can do it like this if you want,
Yeah, we can pretend, that we are next to each other. So can you just stay here in the picture so we can click a picture and I can share it later. Cheers! Cool. Thank you so much, Ben. It was really, really insightful. I will let you go and have some conversations with people on Slack. And I think you're also trying to solve a challenge or to participate to the hackathon yourself, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. Are you looking for a team, right? Or I think you posted something along those lines today.
Yeah, we could do a bigger team. We could perhaps try and connect all the partners, in sort of one big unified solution. But let's see.
I like this idea very much. Yeah, thanks again. Clap, 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 clap for Ben. Clap it up, everybody. We'll see you all again in 30 minutes for our next conversation, where we will go all the way from Madrid to Bangkok. See you in 30 minutes, everyone. Ciao.